Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Mitch. Good Sunday morning to you all. Hope you guys are doing great out there this morning and having a fantastic start to your day and a great weekend out there so far. Got you some updated information on what's going to happen weather-wise for your Sunday. We have a severe weather risk today for the Northeast that we really need to figure out and get very detailed on. Keep you guys covered and aware up there on what potentially could unfold later on this afternoon, as we do have somewhat of a rare tornado risk for areas of interior New England. So we are going to speak on that. We are going to sort of dissect different regions of the Northeast. We'll have timestamps up for you folks to take advantage of in that area. And then we're going to talk about some heat. It's going to be very, very hot for a lot of like the I-95 corridor. I'm talking about heat index. The heat index could potentially reach like 105, maybe even 110 in some areas, especially the Delmarva area. You know, for example, folks in the Delmarva region waking up to temperatures like in the low 80s as your low temperatures. So you didn't even, get into a comfortable temperature this morning. And that's how it is this time of the year when you have a lot of moisture rising up to certain areas. It doesn't allow for temperatures to really drop much overnight into the morning. So that's what we're dealing with this morning ahead of this system. So we'll speak on that. We'll talk about everybody else in the lower 48, and then we'll give you an update on the tropics, talk a little bit about what's to come as far as severe weather risk for the coming days into early this week. So if you guys have not subscribed, certainly consider doing that. Like the video if you like it, and if anybody has anything that I can pray about or pray over, as always, please put those in the comments below. Let's get rolling here. So this is what's going on right now. It's pretty quiet across the northern tier of the country. The western U.S. pretty quiet. You know, we do have some always much needed moisture across Arizona, New Mexico, and this will continue to be a thing throughout the next 24 hours. And then we got some moisture that continues right off the coast of South Texas. More so in Mexico, though, so we got that going on. We got a lot of tropical moisture between Florida and Cuba and the Bahamas. Still got moisture sort of dancing around off the coast of the southeast from the leftovers of this invest, this little tropical system that we had going on. And then we have our main show, which is a pretty potent low pressure up here in areas of Canada, Ontario, Quebec. This will move into Quebec, and this low up here, this cyclone, will actually be what's going to drive in all the conditions that support severe weather across the New England region today. So, I mean, this does have that classic low pressure look. You kind of have the tail right here, a little bit of a shrimp type look. Main moisture pushing out ahead, and this is going to open up a sector right here that's already opening up across areas of New England, where the atmosphere is going to try to become prime after the morning rain this morning, later on this afternoon to this evening. Got another system up here in Canada spinning around, could pop off some strong to severe storms across the northern tier of the country. But this is what's going on right now. I had a segment last night for today's severe weather risk for the Northeast, but we're going to dive back into all this again. Talk about everything for you folks. So this is what's going on right now. Watches, mornings, and advisories. You know, the big story is heat advisories. The middle of the country getting quite hot, but we now have heat advisories in the panhandle of Florida. Some of this might get issued into South Georgia in the coming hours, but the criteria is much higher in here in areas of the southeast. But they do have heat advisories in the Sandhills of North Carolina, coastal plains, all of the Delmarva region, New Jersey, areas of the Delmarva have excessive heat warnings. Heat indices, which is your feels like temperatures, will be, 105, maybe as high as 110 degrees. So the big story today outside of the severe weather for the Northeast is the heat. It's very hot, and it's also very humid. Yesterday was very active across the Midwest. There's been a lot of flooding. There was tornadoes near Janesville, Wisconsin. I say that town name a lot. And certainly got very active. So tornadoes ended up being a confirmed thing in that 5% risk area. So we're hoping that does not play out today. But the excessive rainfall outlook, really the main story is finally you'll get a break from the rain, by the way, in the Midwest today. Most of the rain will fall up here in New England, Maine, where you're getting a lot of rain this morning. We'll continue to get a lot of rain throughout the next, I would say, 6 to 8 hours before, you might get a little bit of a break. But slight risk up here in areas of northern Vermont, northern New Hampshire, and the entire northern half of Maine means there's a 15% risk of flash flood if rainfall exceeding flash flood guidance, always like that trick me up a little bit sometimes. So be aware of that. A couple inches of rain could fall on top of what's already fell out there this morning. A Storm Prediction Center outlook. I will mention a little bit of a marginal risk here across the plains. Marginal risk that's much larger up here in areas of Montana, North Dakota. There will be a risk of strong to severe storms. But of course, the big story is across New England, stretching all the way down to the mid-Atlantic, and all the way to the west side of the Appalachian Mountains here into Kentucky, areas of Ohio, western West Virginia. Marginal risk extending all the way down to Arkansas. But you see this enhanced risk here in the orange. That is the big storyline. Let's go over this really quick, and then we're going to zoom into the Northeast. The tornado risk today confined to the Northeast. 10% risk of a tornado in the yellow, 5% risk in the brown, 2% in the green. But really, the wind threat, 30% chance, 5% chance here, 5% chance here. Hail threat, 5% here, 5% here. Now, we did not get a bump up to a 15% risk. That could change. But really, I just want to zoom into the Northeast here. So, you got a slight risk. I mean, stretching almost all the way down to the Tennessee-Kentucky line, Jackson, Charleston, West Virginia, Columbus, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Baltimore, D.C., New York City, Albany, Hartford, Boston, Portland, Binghamton, Albany. Slight risk, level 2 out of 5. Enhanced risk, Concord. You guys have that pretty much. 75% of New Hampshire's under an enhanced risk. All the way down into central and western areas of Massachusetts. You got over half of the state of Vermont enhanced risk, and then a very small section of eastern New York State, just east of Albany, has an enhanced risk, level 3 out of 5. What is this driven off of? Well, this is the tornado outlook. The yellow area, that is a 10% risk of a tornado within 25 miles of any given location. In that yellow. I mean, that's pretty uncommon up here. You can almost call it rare. In fact, I would. So in the brown, that's a 5% risk of a tornado. The green is a 2% risk of a tornado. So we do have some viewers up here. I know Robin's one of them that lives in Vermont, southern Vermont. You guys need to pay attention to this today. This is in some of this higher terrain of the Appalachian Mountains. And it is certainly going to get very active. Some people might not even get a drop of rain. That's how discreet some of these storms could be. So be aware. And of course, there's never a non-zero threat of a tornado when you have a chance of storms, but there is a 2% risk that stretches all the way, almost pretty much covers the entire state of PA and a good section of New Jersey, all the way down to northern sections of Maryland, West Virginia, southeastern sections of Ohio. The wind threat will be something serious today. A lot of favorable wind flow in the upper levels of the atmosphere and the lower levels that's going to support damaging winds. So in that red area, that's a 30% chance of winds exceeding 55 to 60 miles per hour within 25 miles on any given location. In the yellow area, that's a 15% risk of that. So damaging winds will be a big threat today, just as big as tornadoes. In the hail outlook, basically not even worth like pulling up, but we will, just a smaller risk in this brown area of hail. The ingredients in the atmosphere will not support much hail. Very juiced up atmosphere. Typically when you have a very juiced up atmosphere, you don't have a lot of cool air aloft. You need that cool air aloft for hail. Not going to have as much of that today, but we'll see. We might get a bump up to a 15% risk in this area up here in the Northeast, the interior Northeast. So let's go on and dissect this. Let's really just focus in on Maine in this. I know you see Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts at the bottom of your screen, but let's really just focus on Maine here. This morning, we'll continue to have just a whole lot of heavy rain that'll continue to move in. But it'll move in, it'll move out very fast. Caribou, you guys, Holton, you guys will get a lot of rain. This will eventually clear out. And then a little bit of a sector, I wouldn't say a little bit, pretty large sector opens up here in Maine. This is where your ingredients will try to build back in. The atmosphere will try to destabilize, get hot and humid, and then this will set the stage for these storms right into here that'll move back into this region. So that's what we watch for. Okay, typical kind of severe weather setup that supports tornadoes as a warm sector moves in. And as we get into this afternoon, 4, 5, 6 o'clock this afternoon into this evening, these storms will move in and then they will pack a punch, especially in southern Maine. If you live down here, Augusta, Portland, you guys, highest risk of severe weather, especially the further south you get, closer to New Hampshire, to like the southern southeast coastline, New Hampshire. That'll be the highest the severe weather threat gets for sure down here. So you back this up. This is getting into 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock. These storms are really raging down here at that time frame. I would say that has the best chance to be happening in that time frame. So damaging winds, a tornado threat is with this. I would say a tornado risk is positioned a little bit further southwest, but still damaging winds. This looks like a nasty line of storms capable of producing those very strong winds, and that'll sweep through the southern half of Maine. Cannot rule out some stronger storms up here in central Maine, but I think you are lacking some ingredients, especially with the morning rain that moves in, sort of stabilize the atmosphere. Let's see if it can recuperate, but this will move all the way into the coastal regions, probably start to lose some steam, and then head on off out into the North Atlantic. We could get some more storms that fire behind this. Watch out, Caribou, maybe later this evening. Could get some more storms that are going like at 10. Just love when it does that. It's always awesome. All right, go on, get on off my screen here. Wow. You're really killing my vibe there. It seems like that happens at least once every 2 weeks. But anyways, back to the weather for my friends here in Maine. Storms ongoing right here, starting to move out of Canada, back into Maine. I don't think that these will pack as much of a punch. I think it's the stuff that happens in the afternoon, in the evening. But this continues and affects areas of Maine overnight. And then we wake up tomorrow morning to much calmer conditions. So, if we look at the updraft velocity swath, of course, southern Maine is the area you watch out for the most. It does show those highlighted colors indicating rotating updrafts, meaning we could have some rotation with some of these storms that could produce a tornado or two. So, be aware of this. This is not very common at all, very uncommon. Like I said, you can almost call it rare. But I would say for the state of Maine, the southern sections of the state will see the worst impacts. And, you look at the damaging winds, you see that line of storms depicted by the latest long-range HRRR model that moves through southern Maine. That area right there in like orange. Sorry, guys. Man. Between advertisements popping up in the video and sneezes, we struggling this morning. But anyways, in this area right here, 50, 60, maybe as much as 65 mile per hour wind gusts are possible. So, like I said, I know I've said this many times over the last 5 minutes. If you live in the southern sections of the state of Maine, that's where the highest risk of severe weather is certainly going to be. So, please be aware of that. And rainfall will be a big deal up here over the next 24 hours. Inch, 2 inches, maybe as much as 3 inches of rain here in western Maine. So, be aware of any flash flooding, a lot of rain. Just about everybody in the state of Maine will get rain today. Moving on down south, this is going to be the epicenter of the worst weather chances today. So this morning, not a whole lot going on. We'll get a substantial long period of clearing. This is getting into about noon, 1 p.m. Notice some storms are mainly heading off to the north of southern Mass. We got some storms kind of moving out of the Adirondacks into Vermont. And guys, these storms up here could produce a tornado. Once again, I mention this a lot. You always watch in these setups the southern flank of the storm. So ingredients are the best just south of these storms most of the time because all this action is stabilizing the atmosphere. So you always want to watch the southern flank of these storms. So you look at this storm right here in central Vermont. This could be capable of producing a tornado because you got a lot of ingredients in the atmosphere feeding into that. And it's not being disturbed, if you will, by just clusters of rain. But you keep this going. I mean, you got to watch storms like this. You see how it moves from Vermont to New Hampshire? These are the storms you watch. That could be an all-out supercell producing a tornado. So you guess is where you got that 10% risk of a tornado. Then you watch this other cluster of storms that moves in. This is around 4 to 5 p.m. It kind of moves over the same areas. And once again, you even watch these little storms. And guys, this isn't exactly what the radar is going to look like. This is all we got to look at. We just got model guidance until it actually unfolds later on this afternoon. But it does show, the latest HRRR model, does show the worst weather around 5 p.m., more so up in Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine. A whole lot has not happened yet in southern New England. But that might change quickly around dinner time tonight when we get some storms in western Mass that starts to fire. And you got to watch these storms right here. You see this one lone storm? Listen, I mean, if something like that was to happen, tons of ingredients feeding into this. All right, there could be a tornado being produced by any kind of storms that forms in mass. Probably more higher populated region compared to maybe Vermont and New Hampshire, especially when you get closer to the eastern sections of mass. But, wondering about Boston, some model guidance doesn't really show anything really affecting the city, but it very well could. All that first main action moves out, and then we got to watch later on for storms down here in like New York City. You see these storms down here. Long Island, I mean, this is for like 9 to 11 p.m., but, this run, the model doesn't show it that intense, but that doesn't mean they're not going to be intense. And we kind of have to go back to, go back to the 06Z run to go out a little bit further. And, this run does extend those storms a little bit further south, closer to Boston, but still not quite there. And then we just watch for these storms until the late evening hours that kind of move across the entire area. And then we got this line of storms that forms in like southeast Mass after midnight tonight. We'll see if that actually unfolds. So, the radar compared to yesterday evening's video I made, the HRRR model doesn't look as worrisome, I would say, but that does not mean that it's not going to unfold in more of a worrisome scenario, if you will. So, and then the updraft Felicity swath keeps most, this is only because this run of the HRRR model really doesn't develop any storms down here, but it keeps most of the rotation with these storms up here in Vermont, New Hampshire, areas of New York State, certainly in the Maine that we already discussed. And, it keeps the tornado risk mainly up here. So, but any storms that could develop in Massachusetts, southern New England, guys, I'm telling you, you would very well see slashes of colors down here. It just doesn't develop many storms in southern New England. Keeps it more up in Vermont, New Hampshire, interior New England. But you see these little areas, these little slashes. This is indicated by rotating updrafts from the storms that this particular model run is showing. So be aware of that. And, to kind of reiterate this and double down on what I'm saying, you look at the significant tornado parameter. And remember, the higher the number, the better ingredients there is in the atmosphere for tornadoes. So you keep this in movement here. Of course, it spikes up here in Vermont, New Hampshire. But you notice down here in Massachusetts, too. I mean, Connecticut, Rhode Island, even Boston. I mean, you're starting to get 2s and 3s on a significant tornado parameter. And it really spikes even more so as you start to get into about 6 p.m. this afternoon, this evening. But, is there any storms in this area? If you can get storms in this area, significant tornado parameter numbers are getting on up there. 4s, 5s, and 6s, even more in some areas. So storms can move into this environment. That means you're probably going to have a risk of them producing a tornado. So just keep that in mind when you look at some of these just radar simulations that I show you. Because, of course, I cannot show you exactly what happens. I can't predict the future. I would be very, very good at this if I could. Just be mindful of that for sure. And then wind gusts, just with any storms out there. I know this looks very scattered everywhere, but with any storms, they're capable of producing 55, 60 mile per hour winds. So be aware of that. It does show some gusty winds out on Long Island this evening, potentially producing 40, 50 mile per hour wind gusts that might even be associated with like non-thunderstorm conditions. So move a little bit further into the mid-Atlantic, maybe southern sections of the Northeast, if you want to call it that, the Delmarva area. This is going to be more so one swooping cluster of showers and storms. So we get to about lunchtime, 1 p.m. We got storms up here in the Finger Lakes region, Syracuse, maybe some storms around Buffalo, Erie, western PA, eastern Ohio, storms near Cleveland, Ohio. These storms start to, get into the Pittsburgh area, start to move a little bit further from west to east. We got storms in the southern tier of New York, western PA, and then we take it to about 7 p.m. A lot of this storm action is starting to work into central PA, still storms up here in New York State, just scattered downpours in West Virginia, maybe some strong to severe storms in southeast Ohio. I'll show more of Ohio here in a second. And all this action will eventually kind of just drift throughout the state, all these states you see on here. This is around 9 p.m. We got some storms really close to Binghamton, storms really close to Scranton, scattered downpours down here in the Delmarva, D.C. area, but it does not look that well put together. And I think this is because most of this action is well south of a low pressure up in Canada. So you're really lacking kinematics to really fuel these storms and really, I would say, develop them fully, if that makes any sense. So you start to get into the overnight hours, just scattered downpours across the Delmarva area. All in all, this area does have a slight risk, and I do think you're going to get some severe weather, but I don't think it's going to be anything as comparable as what could happen on up the road into the northeast. Updraft Felicity, it doesn't show much in the way of any rotation. And like I said, tornado threat is significantly less down here because you're away from that low that really brings in better low-level winds that really support tornado risk down here. You're just too far south away from that low. But certainly could get a brief tornado around here. You cannot rule it out at all. And then the projected wind gusts from some of these storms, definitely some gusty winds. You see these areas in orange. You're getting close to 50 mile per hour winds with some of these storms. So some of these storms will produce, especially in PA and New York State, even areas of Ohio, winds capable of producing 55, 60, 65 miles per hour. So definitely be aware of that. And we head on down the road just to cover the rest of the southern apps, covering a lot of people in this. And what's going on with the rain right now will probably begin to weaken, but then we're going to have the refiring of storms. Could happen right on top of like Louisville, Cincinnati, certainly up there to Columbus, Lexington, Kentucky, Frankfurt. You guys could get some storms this afternoon. Southern areas of Ohio getting those storms capable of producing some strong winds, very small tornado risk, and then maybe a little bit of a hail threat. All this energy will drift down to southern Kentucky, eastern Kentucky. And one thing that has increased is the severe weather threat a little bit further west. So if you live in like Bowling Green, maybe as far south as Nashville, as we're getting into this evening, some storms are possible for sure for you guys. And all this action will just steadily drift south. Storms could make it all the way like Huntsville, Alabama, Florence, the Cumberland Plateau by the time you get into the overnight hours. So we'll see what happens with that. But we talk about what's driving this, and we'll go over this pretty quickly for you guys. This is winds in the mid-levels of the atmosphere. Well, we might as well call it the upper levels because it's way on up there, about 18,000 feet up. It's what we call a mid-level jet. So where you see these colored areas, basically the areas in like purplish, almost pink colors, that's when you have a pretty good bit of flow in the mid to upper levels of the atmosphere, over 50 knots. So when we look at this and we see these more, colored regions right in here, that means that we have, a good bit of flow in the upper levels of the atmosphere. This flow, if you will, really helps to, get these storms going. So we got plenty of that over the northeast. So we're not going to have any issue with getting these storms going. We call this kinematics. They're favorable wind flow aloft to support severe weather, whether it's in the low levels, the mid levels, the upper levels. You certainly got it. So you're definitely going to have a lot of wind energy in the atmosphere, okay? And these are, the winds in the mid to upper levels of the atmosphere, mainly coming out the west. If you look at the low levels of the atmosphere, it's what we call the low-level jet. We really look at this when we're really searching for more of a substantial damaging wind threat or tornado risk. So with this low pressure up here in Canada, areas of Quebec and Ontario, moving out of Ontario into Quebec, this low is creating a pretty substantial low-level wind field. So that supports a tornado threat, supports damaging winds, and I would really watch out later on this afternoon for any storms up here in northern Vermont, northern New Hampshire, and the Adirondacks of New York. They're going to have plenty of low-level wind fuel, I guess you could say, for damaging winds, especially up here. You got, over a 50-knot low-level jet, certainly tons of low-level winds that's going to support damaging winds. So, even all the way down to Pennsylvania. You look down here, definitely a lot of low-level winds that's going to support damaging winds with any storms that could really reach that severe limit. So, big low-level wind field over the northeast. And then we compare that with your moisture levels in the atmosphere. And we don't even have to stay on this long, guys. There's tons of humidity. Your dew points are certainly well supported for severe weather. Remember, we talk about dew points in the 60s and 70s being really supportive, a thermodynamic for severe weather. When you walk outside and it's very humid, remember, gauge humidity off dew points, not your humidity percentages on your Weather Channel app or whatever it may be. dew points are the best way to gauge it. When you have dew points in the 70s, it's very humid outside. So tons of low-level moisture out ahead of these storms that form, and it's going to be very humid, if it isn't already, in New England ahead of these storms. So certainly a lot of ingredients in the atmosphere that are going to be overlapping each other. And therefore, we're going to have a severe weather threat. So let's break down the rest of the country. The southeast today, some tropical rains down here in Florida. We're going to have some outflow boundaries kind of popping off. So, if you're vacationing down Florida, Fort Myers to Tampa, Orlando, Disney World, you guys are going to get a lot of shower and storm activity. Could get some storms, along eastern South Carolina that could form. Oh, man, we haven't had rain in my house there in central South Carolina in about 13 days. I know y'all are laughing at me for you folks out in Texas and people that have dealt with much more substantial droughts, but it's wild. We haven't got rain since June 10th, and it is pretty wild how fast stuff dry up when it's so hot. But people's yards are just toast, crispy, and it'd be nice to get some rain. But anyways, besides just some pop-up activity, very isolated, certainly count your blessings always, but definitely count them if you happen to get lucky across this region right here. It's going to be pretty dry. The main action, is up here in Arkansas and really just northeast Arkansas, Kentucky, later on this afternoon, this evening, and then Florida, we'll just have some storms sort of just forming and then kind of imploding, then outflow boundaries kind of popping up, more storm activity. That's about it. And then some of this activity will surge down to the deep south from the north into areas of Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi. So we might be waking up to some storms, like maybe around Birmingham tomorrow, very possible. I would say the biggest story, though, is the temperatures. Feels like temperatures, your heat indices, okay? We're going to be getting close to 110 in the Panhandle of Florida today. Jacksonville, 103, 105, Tallahassee, 105, 108. Look at the heat indices in Georgia into South Carolina. It's going to be just very hot. Kind of one of those days where, you just don't really want to go outside. This is going to be one of those summer days, and it's going to be like this most of the week for the Southeast, where, you get to about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you kind of walk outside, and all you can hear outside, you don't even hear any kids playing, you just hear the ACs humming. It's just a kind of low frequency just humming out there, and outside of that, just, yeah. It seems like when I was a kid, we would go outside anyways when it was really, really hot. But, these days, it's different technology. I know my girls don't like going outside. I try to take them out there sometimes, but it is hot. I can't really blame them. It is just hot. But I know one thing I try to do with my girls is, I know we got soccer practice coming up here in the coming couple months, and I want them to be very conditioned for the heat because our fall soccer starts in August here in South Carolina, and it is still hotter than Hades in August in South Carolina, just like it is most places. But just a little bit up the road, talking about the Carolinas, heat indices will be into the low 100s, upper 90s for a lot of these areas, especially when you get into northeast North Carolina. This is when the heat really gets going, and we'll zoom into the Delmarva here in a second. But the northeast, we've already pretty much covered everything, but I do want to show you that large look. There's that low I'm keep talking about that's really driving this severe weather threat today. This low will continue to work its way through, really drive this damaging wind, tornado risk for today. And then we'll get into tomorrow morning, and sort of the upper low will kind of move through. And this could bring more of a showery type day across the upper portion of the northeast and New England region. But we've kind of already covered all of that. If you went right to the New England time frame, wondering what's going on with the severe weather, back it on up, and there's a timestamp that breaks down the severe weather threat. But the temperatures, guys, brutal in the mid-Atlantic region. Washington, D.C. will have a heat index probably approaching 105 by this afternoon. The Delmarva will be downright miserable, especially closer to the Bay regions. Heat indices 100 to 110 range. New York City will probably get a heat index of about 100 today. New Jersey, Delaware, just very hot temperatures. These aren't actual air temperatures, guys. It's the heat indices. Your air temperatures, this is what it could potentially look like today. Very, very hot. Mid-upper 90s, someone's going to get 100 probably. You're looking at tomorrow, though, a little cold front moves in, substantially cooler for most, and then it warms on back up. But the south central U.S., besides just some rain showers down here in South Texas, you continue to get these rain showers down here. And then the chance for a strong to severe storm here in Arkansas and really northeastern sections of Arkansas, maybe the Boot Heel, Missouri. Most of everybody else continues to be dry. It's starting to dry out fast after you guys got a lot of rain kind of back in spring. But, we haven't gotten near as much rain in Oklahoma and Texas lately. So we're going to get that moisture that's almost kind of monsoonal, if you will, in New Mexico. A little bit of moisture around. But outside of that, guys, not a very active weather day here in the Southern Plains. The north central U.S., you're finally quieting down, but you could get a risk of a strong to severe storm or two in northern, especially northeastern Minnesota. A little bit of rain shower activity, maybe a storm in the UP of Michigan. Storms might make it all the way down to the Minneapolis-St. Paul region. Very isolated storms kind of moving throughout Wisconsin, but very, very isolated. You notice they're not very widespread. And then as we're getting into the overnight hours, we'll watch another piece of energy that'll set the stage for a severe weather day across the upper Midwest. And of course, we'll talk about that in the coming videos. But we'll watch this energy as it's making through tomorrow morning. But outside of that, not a very active weather day in the north central U.S. Western U.S., as far as what's falling from the sky, a little bit of shower activity in the Pacific Northwest. And then we'll have kind of the rejuiced up or re-amplification of this moisture across the Four Corners region, and they'll kind of move around. Very scattered like shower activity, maybe a storm is possible in southern Arizona. This will form, kind of drift around, not do a whole lot. Really, anybody could get it. And you look at how much rainfall could fall between the next 24 hours. Very small amounts, a few 1/100ths of an inch of rain here or there. Somebody might get 1/10 to 2/10 of an inch of rain in southern areas of Arizona, but not a whole lot of rain, nothing really for California. So temperatures today, a little bit of cooler air behind this frontal boundary, so only 70s and 80s across the upper Midwest and areas of the Ohio Valley. You get ahead of this frontal boundary, and temperatures are well into the 90s to low 100s. We've already kind of discussed that. Very hot conditions. But out west, only area that's looking cool is the immediate Pacific Northwest area, where you guys have some of the best summers in the entire U.S. Is if you don't like really hot temperatures. But the plains getting very hot, well into the 90s, all the way up into Montana. The high plains getting very hot. The further northeast you work, you get on the other side of the boundary, much cooler temperatures across areas of the upper Midwest. So, as far as severe weather threats to come, I am watching a little marginal risk down here in the eastern Carolinas. Stalled out cold front will get some of these storms to hit severe limits. I ain't gonna lie, I wouldn't mind a severe storm in my neck of the woods just to bring some interesting weather and just some rain, more importantly. But a pretty large slight risk across the upper Midwest that we need to dissect and figure out here in the next video or so. So we're definitely going to have another severe weather day across the upper Midwest, so be aware of that. And then we get into tomorrow, this shifts a little bit further south. I'm sorry, this is Tuesday. So Chicago, Milwaukee, Peoria, Des Moines, maybe even all the way down to Indianapolis and St. Louis, Detroit, Cleveland. You guys are going to have a severe weather threat for Tuesday that we need to figure out. So as far as an update on the tropics, guys, this is technically still over water. Has a 40% chance to develop within the next basically 24 hours. We'll see if it does. Not even really going to look at the satellite of it. Just not going to get too deep into it. This will be history here by the time we get into the next 2 days. But I will talk about I think the tropics are going to quiet down for a period. The only thing that's worth mentioning is some tropical waves out in the tropical Atlantic, the Maine development region, which is this region right here. So if you'll notice, just a corridor of greens, some splotches of yellows and reds. These are just tropical moisture, little impulses of tropical waves that will just kind of ride down here. And you could get something, as we're getting into deeper this week, that sneaks into the Caribbean. Will it try to develop? There's a possibility. But, all we can do is really just watch at this point. And then, you got other little impulses of energy down here, tropical waves that'll try to get into the Caribbean. One thing that I'll mention a lot as we get deeper into hurricane season, this area of the Caribbean right here, let's just roll on it right here. This is what we call the graveyard of the Caribbean, the Eastern Caribbean. This is where a lot of tropical systems go to die because there's usually a lot of high-end shear in this area. But because of something, and it's normally because of something called the tut that comes down here. It's basically this upper level low that's almost stalled in one spot sometimes likes to develop, and it comes down here and kind of lashes these tropical systems down here. But we'll discuss that more in the coming months. But we just got to watch for these little tropical waves. I mean, and really none of them show much in the way of any development. And I think it's just because we have a lot of Saharan dust out there, dry air really preventing development. But with the European, same kind of deal. You just watch these little impulses of green, but nothing really consolidates into all-out energy at all. So we will continue to bring you frequent updates on the tropics, but I do think that after a little early burst of activity last week and the week before, things are probably going to quiet down for a period. So we'll just have to watch how quiet it'll be. And this is very typical for any hurricane season, even one that's predicted to be hyperactive. So God bless all y'all. Stay safe in the Northeast today, and I'll talk to you guys soon.